Now, there's an interesting thing that I've been thinking about, and it's just because I know how to swim doesn't mean that I know what happens to me in the water, or how the science behind swimming and the different techniques that take place and all the information that's available to us around swimming. So I've had a little bit of a look at this stuff, and what I've learned is what the scientists are saying to us is that our blood is 98% like seawater. I didn't know that. I didn't know that the stuff that is flowing in, and it's just because I have blood doesn't mean that I know anything about it. Embryonic fluid, the fluid that babies are born in, 99% like seawater. I mean, that's quite an interesting fact. I didn't realize. It's not really the point of what I want to talk about, but if they start talking about evolution and those kind of stuff, it's quite interesting stuff. But that's not what the point of this discussion is about. What happens when we go in the water is our heart rate slows down by 30%. So if I'm a reasonably fit person, so my heart rate is usually around 65 beats a minute. That means that if I go in the water, my heart rate will slow down to 40 beats a minute. There'll be a 30% drop in my heart rate. If your heart rate is 100, it will go down to 70. Now, the interesting thing about that is if you put your face in a bowl of water, your heart rate will go down with 30%. There's a thing that happens to our bodies in the water. Now, the stuff that I'm speaking about, some of the stuff that I'm speaking about, that's years and years and years of research. What the guys that I've been listening to, what the guys are talking about is they're talking about 50 years of scientific research has gone into what happens to the human body when it comes into contact with water, and this is some of the information that they're sharing with us. Now, the deeper you go, it sounds so bizarre. The deeper you go, the more your body changes into like an aquatic mammal's body. What happens to your lungs? I'm sure everybody's aware that the minute that you get into the water, the blood starts leaving your extremities and centers around the center of your body to stay warm. But there's a certain depth that if you pass a certain depth, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 30 meters, I'm not 100% sure. Things change inside your body. In 1970, they said that it would be impossible for a human being to swim further than 100 meters down. That if a person hit the 100 meters mark underwater, that your body would implode, that it would squash. Now, as a point of interest in line with this conversation, every 10 meters that you go underwater is the same as 1 atmospheric pressure. So if you go down 30 meters, that's approximately 3 atmospheres. If you go down 100 meters, that's 10 atmospheres. They're saying that you will just compress, and I don't know what that would look like, but yeah, you would implode on yourself. your lungs begin to shrink, your whole body changes to adapt to be at those depths and in the water. Now, I'm talking about being in the water without scuba gear. Because when you use scuba gear, they use a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen to balance out the oxygen in your lungs. Are there any scuba divers here? To balance out the oxygen in your lungs. And what that means is that as you go underwater, you get to certain levels and you have to equalize and then go further down. And the same happens if you reverse, if you come back up out of the water. There's a mountain sickness, they call it peripheral edema, I think it's called, is when there's so little oxygen in the air that your lungs start to fill up with fluid. It's edema, something edema, I'm not sure if it's peripheral. Slightly different thing, but we can talk about that. There's this chap, and I've mentioned it a few times in Concern Group. In fact, there's a number of people who climb up Everest without oxygen. They do it all the time. They go. There's a certain level in the atmosphere that you cross. I think it's 20,000 feet above sea level, where they call it the death zone. And what that means is you go into a zone where your body starts eating itself to stay alive because there's no oxygen. You actually start dying. And what the majority of climbers do, which is the whole reason why they have mountain guides, which they call Sherpas, carrying oxygen cylinders and leaving dumps of oxygen cylinders, is that the guys can continue to breathe as they climb. You can imagine just climbing a mountain and holding your breath, because that's what it's like. So it really then becomes a question of mind over matter, which is a separate thing. I'll talk about that as well. Interestingly, the mountain guides on Everest was just something that really fascinated me for a long time. They live at a very high level, above sea level. They're born at that level, and they live at that level, and they spend their whole lives high above sea level. So they use these guides to carry supplies up and down the mountain for the tourists who come to Everest to climb the mountain. And what in lines with what you were saying is, what the guys do is they climb up to a certain level and acclimatize, and then come back down and go back up again. And they do that a couple of times, and then they go to the next one, and then they do the final push up to the top of the mountain. So there's a lot of acclimatization that needs to take place when you're climbing a mountain. When you in the water, there's a different thing that takes place in the water, because there's no breathing. There's a swimming technique type of competition that guys enter in called freediving, and that's to see how far down these guys can go on one breath, how deep underwater they can go. And there's two records. There's one technique where the guys go down with a weight. Oh yes, we were talking about the bends. That's what I wanted to talk about. So I'll come back to the weight. So with the oxygen cylinders, if you come up too fast, the nitrogen starts bubbling in your blood. And I've heard of tests. I mean, people do it all the time where they run out of oxygen, or there's some accident that happens too deep underwater, and they have to medevac these guys. They take them out of the water and they put them in a compression chamber, or else they die because their blood starts to bubble because of the nitrogen escaping. If anybody's ever pulled a fish out of very deep water, they pop. I feel quite sorry for the fish. But if you take a test tube of blood, if you draw blood of somebody at like however many meters below the surface, and you just bring it up to the top, it fizzes. Like if you put a Garon Sansi or one of those Carenza Cs in a glass of water and it bubbles, that's what happens to your blood inside your body if you come up too quickly. But with free diving, it's on one breath. You take one breath, and there's no process of equalization that needs to take place, except with your ears. Obviously, if you're swimming down, you need to be able to balance your ears. So going down with a weight and coming back up with a balloon. This is part of the competitions that these guys do. The world record is 200 meters. So they have a cable, they hang it in the sea, and the guy goes down, he holds onto the weight, and it just pulls him down. And when he hits a certain point, there's a balloon, he releases the balloon, and the balloon takes him back up to the surface again. And the second type of competition is free diving, but without assistance, without weights. So you swim yourself down, and that's 123 meters. 123 meters under the water on one breath. That's far, and that's you're underwater for quite a while if you're swimming down and then back up again. To the best of my knowledge, not deep underwater, but at surface level, the world record for holding breath the longest is around the 24-minute mark. 24 minutes. There's that famous magician David Blaine. I don't know if you guys know who David Blaine is. He held his breath for 17 minutes on the Oprah show. One breath, 24 minutes underwater. Interestingly, when they do training with these guys to hold their breath, and try it after the group, see how long you can hold your breath for, but with a little bit of training, you can hold your breath for 3 minutes. Little bit of, show you some techniques, and this all has to do with this, they call it the master switch, with this mammalian reflex. Not difficult to do. And it's not a lot of hyperventilating or anything like that, just normal breathing, and you hold your breath, proper training, 3 minutes in one day. So, 123 meters underwater. What they say happens is that the guy's heart rates slow down to almost 7 beats a minute. 7 heartbeats in a minute. Now, a person should not be conscious at 7 beats a minute. That will render you unconscious. But this is this is what these guys achieved with being underwater. Now, again, remember, I started off this talk by saying, you know, we think we know about water and swimming just because we can, just because we know how to swim, that we know all of these things. But there's a lot more that we are capable of, and that the human body is capable of, if we apply ourselves to finding out what it is. At 50 meters depth in a free dive, you're no longer being pulled to the surface. You're being pulled down. So gravity almost seems like gravity outweighs the amount of oxygen in your system, and you just go down. I've seen, and it's quite beautiful when you see these guys in the ocean and they're standing on a ledge on an ocean trench or something like that, and they dive in and they go down. You naturally begin to descend after 50 meters. At 70 meters, they say that the urge to breathe kicks in. Now, I don't know, and I should have looked, I don't know how long it takes to get to 70 meters, but that's when they're saying at that depth, I don't know if it has something to do with the depth or the amount of time that you're spending underwater, but you want to start breathing. And that's where the real challenge comes in, where the real significance of what it is that these guys are doing comes in. Because it's at that point where you need to be present in what it is that you're doing. You're free diving, you're 70 meters underwater, And when these guys free dive, they have a rope in the water with a weight on the end, so that they know where they are, so that they don't get lost and swim around. There's this guy Wim Hof who does the under ice swimming. He holds the world record for swimming under ice. Well, he was swimming under the ice and got lost under the ice, and there weren't any divers in the water, and his retinas froze because the water was so cold, and he couldn't find the way out. But eventually, and he said it was quite interesting, the mental process that took place. He didn't panic. He was present in his life, and divers jumped in and they brought him out the water. And you can think of something like that is if you're in freezing cold, 1 meter ice. Yeah? So that's that much ice. And he's swimming in the ice in a pair of shorts. And your retinas freeze. And you can't see. And you know how frostbite works. You get gangrene, you could have gone blind. At 70 meters underwater, you need to be present in your life. And the one thing that they say at 70 meters depth, don't look up. Don't look up. Because if you look up, you're not here anymore. You're not focused on your objective. It's very similar to when we talk about, there's stuff happening outside the treatment center. You focus on what is happening here, not what is happening there, because what is happening there is going to take you out here. You need to be present in what is taking place here. At 70 meters, that mechanism kicks in. 10 more meters at 80 meters. Your mind starts flipping wildly between conscious and unconscious thinking. Paranoia, freaking out, rushing thoughts. Just at 80 meters depth. The guys are talking 50 years of research that they've put into this stuff. At 80 meters, your mind starts playing tricks on you. Now, I'm talking about something that has got nothing to do with being in rehab. I'm talking about free diving in the ocean. Right? But the techniques are exactly the same. The solution is exactly the same. There's a guy who has arrived at a place where he has to completely let go of what is going on in his mind if he wants to go to the next level. Because that's the turnaround point. It's like, bugger this. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm out of here. Back to the surface, where it's a measured quantity that if you hit a specific depth, your mind is going to start playing tricks on you. And what you do at that point is you don't resist your mind. You don't try and control your mind. You don't try and switch your mind off. You don't try and make your mind want to do something other than what it is doing. You just allow it to happen and you keep going at 80 meters. 123 meters is 13 atmospheres. 13 times the pressure that we experience here. And making it through those challenges is really what gets people to the point where they can do something extraordinary, do something special. Now, we talk about it, and I'm talking about it here a lot in the treatment center. Surrender. Let go. Trust the process. Don't fight what is going on in your mind. Don't try and fight what is going on with you emotionally. Allow it to happen. Let it run. Because if you can pass on to the next level. Now, when the guys, just as an add-on, as a point of interest, when the guys go back, so they hit their goal, they hit their objective, and when they head back to the surface, at 30 meters from the surface, that's where they have the support divers to guide the guys up to the top, because they say that's the most dangerous part of the dive. Interestingly, I don't know why that is. They didn't go into any detail about why that is. And then you must also think that from the world record holder, from 123 meters or from 200 meters, you're swimming back up. Because remember, gravity was pulling you down. So now you're swimming back up against gravity, where it was just a free fall. You're going back up against the resistance. And I don't know if at 50 degrees you become buoyant again, because your lungs have contracted and your heartbeat has slowed down, and you are somehow able to handle circumstances that normally you would not be able to handle, whether with the expansion of the air in your lungs, all of that changes, or whether you have to swim the whole way to the top. But I imagine that it does. Now, the mental process that is described here, to me, is very similar, and I know you guys have been talking about this a little bit, very similar to a meditative process. Because think about it, unfortunately, I have problems with my ears, so I'm not going to be going free diving. As much as I'd like to go and do this experiment and see how this is going to work for me and what the experience is going to be like, I'm on dry land in the middle of Joburg. I'm sure I could find a deep swimming pool somewhere, but I'm not going to. So, do I experience similar experiences here on dry land without having to subject myself to abnormal circumstances? And then again, I want to just remind you of what I said at the beginning, was just because we know about water and we have swimming pools and we go swimming, doesn't mean that we know any of the details that are associated with swimming, or what we are capable of, or how our bodies adapt in unique ways with the specific challenges that we are faced with specific things around water. So we come back to addiction, and the way that I've looked at addiction is there's always been a lot of debate around whether this is a genetic thing or whether this isn't a genetic thing, or whether it's all in our mind or whether it's not all in our mind. And the experience that I've had is that it's possible to stay sober if you stay away from alcohol and drugs. So that's the bare minimum basic requirement. There is well-documented research, 80 plus years of well-documented research, that you cannot make a social drinker out of someone who is a problem drinker. Cannot be done. The only solution is abstinence. Those are indisputable facts. So trying to manage or trying to control is just to succumb to the addiction. Now, there's a physical element to that people are talking about when they talk about the disease concept of addiction. That we have this physical, genetic, that they can identify in our genes that predisposes us to alcoholism. Now, please note that I'm talking about alcoholism and addiction interchangeably. All right, I'm not talking about only alcoholics, and this doesn't apply to addicts. It's exactly the same thing, just the way that I'm wording it at the moment. So we have this genetic issue that if we put that substance in our body, we're going to become alcoholic. So that's one component. Then there's the mental component. And what my experience is, what I've learned, what I've seen is, if you can manage, if you can learn to be responsible for what is going on in your mind, it will help you stay away from picking up that drink. But it's not the only thing that is required to keep people safe from alcohol and drugs. But it's very, very helpful. And the way that we begin, the starting point for mental recovery from addiction is exactly the same thing that happens at 80 meters underwater. Is you've got to give up, and you've got to stop trying to control and manage and switch off and make different and quieten everything that is going on in your mind or with your emotions. Now, just because you have a mind, and just because it thinks, and just because you have emotions, doesn't mean you know anything about them. One of the big mistakes that drug addicts make is they think that because they use drugs, that they know what drugs are about. And I'll tell you exactly what that mistake is because I've thought about it. We know how to find it. We know how to use it. We know how to find people who use it. We know all the paraphernalia and the techniques around it. We don't know the recovery from it. Or else we wouldn't be sitting here in rehab. We know how to recover from alcohol and drugs. There would be no need for rehab. So I can stop when I want to. I'll just stop. But it's exactly the same metaphor. Just because I know about water and just because I know about swimming, I know one small aspect of that experience. So we get into managing the mind and managing the emotions and learning how to take responsibility for that is one aspect of recovery. There are others, but I'd like to talk about that one particular aspect at the moment. And there's a very famous, as I mentioned, 80-year-old experiment that was started in Oxford University called the George Valiant. George Valiant is a guy who wrote a book who picked up part of the experiments, the Oxford experiment. And there are other things that are necessary are new relationships that have been impacted by the addiction, external superegos, competitive behaviors, inspirational group membership. These are the things that are necessary. These are the other things that are necessary for recovery from addiction. And if these things are not present, then the recovery from addiction will not be present. Along with the contemplative aspect of looking at things, which is meditation. It's not it's contemplative, and meditation is one aspect of it. Now, I've looked extensively at meditation, and I've researched meditation for quite some time. I've looked at all the different types, and the one that I have found that is, if I could say, if you had to squeeze out all of the ritual, all of the tradition, all of the having to choose sides. So I'm doing this kind of meditation. I'm a Buddhist, I do this kind of meditation. I'm a Hindu, I do this kind of meditation. I'm a Christian, I do this kind of meditation. Take the sides out of the game. And the most central, because I don't believe that it's necessary that you have to belong to a team to be able to meditate, and experience the benefits of meditation. Mindfulness meditation. It's very simple, very straightforward, very practical, and it's something that is extremely beneficial in helping with crazy head and emotions that we can't identify because they're so complex and happening all the time. I don't know if you had to ask me at a time in my life how you feel, I couldn't tell you if I was happy, sad, angry, mad, ashamed, guilty, anxious, because it was all of those things at the same time, along with all of this noise in my head. My sponsor said to me once, he said to me, if you meditate because, and this is important, if you meditate because you want a specific outcome, that's who says. Do you know enough about meditation to know what the outcome is? Or have you decided that this is what the outcome is of what I want to do, and I will do it so that I get this? And then when you don't get the outcome that you want, the meditation doesn't work. Mindfulness meditation, there's a book there called Mindfulness. It's very informative, got some good information in it. I'm not a big fan of guided meditations, and they have a raisin meditation or a chocolate, when you eat a piece of chocolate and you meditate on that. To me is just such rubbish. But plain, simple, ordinary meditation is breathing. You just focus on your breathing. That's all that you do. Now, I've heard statistics where they say one US military veteran commits suicide every hour. Every hour. And what they've done with these guys is, or what they're trying to do with these guys is teach them breathing techniques. Because meditation, if you try and teach someone meditation, the technique is quite refined. So meditation, the end point where I got to after 4 years of research into this stuff, 3 years of research into this stuff, is that all that you do is you have to feel the air passing through the tip of your nose. That's it. It is hard. It is incredibly difficult. But when I started, just being able to focus on the air going in and out of my lungs was a much more achievable goal. Moving from a breathing technique, this is my experience in my meditation practice, to just observing the air going in and out of my nose, took me 3 months to make that shift. That's a long time to shift from focusing on the breath going in and out of my lungs to the breath going in and out of the tip of my nose. To begin to meditate with my eyes open took me another 3 months, because how wide should I keep my eyes open? Just wide enough, and I'd become totally obsessed with my eyes and blinking, and it was completely a confusing experience. There is no significance to watching the air going in and out of your body, because that's all that you're doing, is watching the air going in and out of your body. The reason why the breathing is used is because you don't have to breathe. Your body breathes automatically. The air goes in and out of your body. When you're asleep, the air goes in and out of your body. It's like you trying to decide on how many beats a minute your heart must beat. You can't do that. And that's what I mean when I talk about breathing exercises. You don't try and breathe. Now, I did this. I got a metronome. Does everybody know what a metronome is? It's one of those things that you put on the piano that helps you keep time. Very rhythmic thing. And I tried to find that spot where I could breathe in for like 1 second and breathe out for 1 second with a metronome. So I tried to control my breathing. Can't do it. Because I breathe in more than I breathe out, and I breathe out more than I breathe in, and then I run out of breath, and then I yawn, and then I'm focusing on my breathing so much I don't even know what the hell I'm doing anymore. It becomes so complicated. So mindfulness meditation is not a breathing technique. It's watching the air going in and out of your body automatically. When I was experiencing panic and anxiety, panic attacks, meditation was too gentle an approach. I tried it diligently, the practices in that book with the CD, and I was also at the very early stages of understanding meditation, and it didn't help me. What helped me there was the stuff that Eckhart Tolle talks about in The Power of Now. Be the observer of what is going on with my thinking. Observe the thoughts in my head. Observe the emotions in my body. The same as observing the air going in and out of your lungs. But those are it's more a mental exercise. That's not meditation. It's a mental exercise. And I had to do some of that stuff first, and then find out how meditation works before that worked, and do that. Because remember, meditation is not a silver bullet cure for whatever ails you. It's a definite starting point in dealing with a noisy head and conflicting emotions, undoubtedly. So, remember I was talking about the dive? At 70 meters, you need to be present in your life. At 18 meters, your thoughts start racing. You need to let them race. You need to let them run. It's exactly the same process that is taking place here on dry land with us, because we haven't been diving in deep water. We've been putting alcohol and drugs in our body and drowning ourselves and trying to kill ourselves that way. Now we're faced with the consequences of that. So if it takes you 10 years to get to the point where things are completely out of control, don't expect a quick bounce back. You're going to have to work at it. Once you break that barrier, you go through the cognitive exercises of Eckhart Tolle, the mental repair. You learn how to meditate. You move on to different stages of recovery. Setting goals. Toughing it out. Grit. Having resilience. Going for what you want and achieving it. That's a skill that you learn. You can't learn it until you've dealt with those other things. Something that can be worked on and something that can be achieved. This that I was speaking about, taking responsibility. This is part of the cognitive exercises, but it's something that works through and becomes very strong. But it has to start somewhere. And it starts with self-management. How do I manage myself? What is it that I need to do to just be okay to be sitting for 10 minutes without losing my mind? Optimism. How to be optimistic about the future and not pessimistic. Everything is cuck. Everything is not lacquer. Things aren't great. Things are going to go badly. I'm always worried about everything that is going wrong. Optimism is something that we have to work on to become optimistic. But only down the road. Conflict management. adaptability, persuasiveness, always a tricky one, sales, teamwork, leadership. These are things that get worked on, but they can't get worked on unless you've addressed the issues in the beginning. So I want to end off with just a few things. Just because you can swim doesn't mean you know about water and what happens to the body in water. Just because you use drugs doesn't mean that you know what it is to recover from addiction. Having ideas about what meditation should and shouldn't deliver is the wrong way to approach meditation. Meditate for the experience of meditating, and then you will see what the benefit of meditation is. And I'm a huge proponent of meditation. Absolutely a firm proponent of meditation. Meditation works if you put in the effort and you put in the research and you find out the things that you need to know. It is so helpful. And then meditation will help you with these other areas. Being a good leader, being a good employee, being a good salesman, being optimistic, setting goals. But meditating won't just allow goals to happen.